The city outside the window resembled a vast, shimmering ocean of lights. From the height of the 24th floor, the roar of the metropolis reached me only as a muffled hum, like the sound of distant surf. I stood by the panoramic window, forehead pressed against the cold glass, watching rare snowflakes melt the moment they touched the surface. Below, in Times Square, crowds were already gathering, but here, in the sterile silence of my apartment, the holiday felt different, distant, and almost surreal. Preparations for midnight were well underway. On the table, covered with a perfectly white tablecloth, sat a setting for one. I arranged the cutlery with manic precision, aligning the edge of every fork with an invisible line. Arthur, that was my name in this world of order and symmetry. This evening, I wanted only one thing: silence and the chance to ring in the new year without fake smiles or obligatory greetings. In the corner of the living room, the television was on. The sound was muted, and only the shifting frames of the news cast bluish flickers onto the walls. I approached the remote to turn up the volume, hoping for some holiday concert. But instead of fireworks, a somber news anchor appeared on the screen. A red ticker ran along the bottom, its letters looking urgent and too sharp. A grainy photo of a man with deep-set eyes and sharp cheekbones appeared. The caption read, "Elijah Crow." The report was live from the walls of the Central Prison, located just a couple of miles from my neighborhood. The reporter pointed to a damaged fence and police officers swarming with dogs. Crow, sentenced to life for a series of brutal crimes, had escaped 2 hours ago, taking advantage of the confusion during a shift change and the holiday rush. The warning was brief: do not open doors to strangers, stay in well-lit areas, and report any suspicious sounds. I turned off the TV. The silence in the apartment instantly became heavy, almost palpable. I checked the lock on the front door. The heavy steel bolt was in place. The windows, despite the height, also had secure latches. I returned to the table, but my appetite was gone. My gaze kept returning to the dark hallway leading to the bedroom. Something banged outside the first firecrackers. I flinched. My heart beat faster, counting out a rhythm that had nothing to do with the joy of anticipation. I walked to the kitchen counter to pour some water, and at that moment, I heard it. A quiet, barely audible sound from the fort. It wasn't a knock or a bell. It was the sound of metal scraping against metal. The thin, persistent screech of a lockpick penetrating the core of the lock. I froze. My fingers gripped the edge of the countertop so hard my knuckles turned white. I didn't move, fearing that even the creak of a floorboard would give me away. The scraping stopped, replaced by a soft click. The door opened slowly, almost silently. A sliver of dim light from the hallway appeared in the doorway. A shadow slipped into the apartment. A tall, thin silhouette in a dark jacket with a hood pulled over his head. The man stepped inside and just as carefully closed the door behind him, locking it. He was in no hurry. He stood in the shadows of the foyer, listening to the breath of the house. I slowly lowered myself to the floor, hiding behind the kitchen island. My breathing became short and shallow. Only one thought pulsed in my head. He is here. Elijah Crow had found refuge in my fortress. I heard his footsteps. They were soft, almost feline. The soles of his boots barely touched the parquet. The steps receded toward the living room. I cautiously peeked out from my hiding spot. The stranger stood with his back to me, looking out the panoramic window at the glittering city. His figure against the backdrop of holiday lights looked ominous. A dark spot on a canvas of millions of sparks. He pulled back his hood. In the light of the street lamps filtering through the glass, I saw the back of his head and his short crop, frost-covered hair. He slowly turned his head, scanning the room. His gaze lingered on the set table. There was no rage or madness on the guest's face, only deep, searing exhaustion and cold calculation. He approached the table. He reached out and touched the edge of a porcelain plate. His fingers were long and narrow, with dirt under the nails. He picked up one of the glasses, held it to the light, inspecting the clarity of the glass, and then set it back down. Every movement was deliberate, devoid of unnecessary haste. I realized I couldn't hide for long. The kitchen island was the only barrier between us. If he decided to check the kitchen, he would see me immediately. I needed a weapon, but the knife was on the table right in front of him. Elijah moved away from the table and headed for the sofa. He sat down, sinking into the soft cushions, and closed his eyes for a few seconds. He seemed to be enjoying the warmth and silence that had been unavailable to him for a long time. Then he stood up again and began to systematically search the room. He looked into the hallway closet, checked the bathroom. Only the bedroom and the kitchen remained. He moved toward the kitchen. I pressed myself into the floor, trying to blend in with the dark wood. At that moment, the city outside exploded. Millions of people shouted in a single burst of emotion, and the first salvos of the main fireworks display shook the air. The glass in the windows vibrated. The sky turned blood red, then emerald green. The sharp sound of the fireworks made Crow freeze. He spun around to the window. The flashes of light momentarily blinded him. This was my only chance. I crawled toward the balcony door, hoping the roar of the celebration would mask my movements. The floor under my knees seemed endless. Every inch was a struggle. I felt sweat stinging my eyes. The fireworks continued a cannonade of explosions, whistles, and the screams of the crowd below. Crow stood by the window, mesmerized by the spectacle. To him, these lights were a symbol of freedom or, perhaps, a signal that the pursuit was ongoing. I reached the door leading to a small technical balcony. I carefully pressed the handle. Cold air rushed in, searing my lungs. I slipped out onto the narrow ledge and pressed myself against the wall. Outside it was noisy. The wind whipped the hem of my housecoat. I looked inside through the glass. Crow was walking slowly through the kitchen. He walked exactly to the spot where I had been sitting a second ago. He looked down, then at the open balcony door. An expression of strange curiosity appeared on his face. He didn't run after me. He walked to the door and slowly pulled it toward him, closing it. I was trapped on a tiny ledge 24 stories up. Below was an abyss filled with light and people who would never hear me. Crow stood on the other side of the glass. He placed his palm against the transparent surface directly opposite my face. His eyes, gray and empty, looked straight into mine. He didn't smile. He just watched. In the light of another burst of fireworks, his face looked like a mask, devoid of human feeling. He slowly turned the latch on the balcony door, blocking the exit completely. Then he returned to the living room. I watched as he sat down at my holiday table. He picked up a fork and knife, cut a piece of the meat I had prepared for myself, and began to chew slowly, watching the last bouquets of fireworks bloom in the sky over the city. The city continued to celebrate. People sang, hugged, and opened champagne, unaware that on one of the hundreds of balconies, in the cold night air, a man was pressing himself against the glass, watching someone else take over his life. The new year had arrived. The clock on the tower below struck midnight, and the sound, caught by the wind, flew away into the darkness, leaving me alone with the silence and the icy wind of the heights. I watched Elijah Crow stand up from the table, turn off the lights in the living room, and walk deep into the apartment, dissolving into the darkness of my rooms. The apartment plunged into gloom, and only rare reflections of city lights continued to dance on the empty walls. I remained outside, in a world that was too loud to hear my cry and too bright to notice my disappearance.